terms of sexual victims, well, the abusers tend to target girls in early, right going through puberty and early adolescence. And we'll read about this later in the book, but that that anxiety levels actually, when puberty hits, there is this kind of a spike in kind of how anxious, you can see it in different ways, like how anxious kids are on average. Like you see it in terms of them becoming more conforming to what peers say, going along with peers say. Also, there's been different studies, kind of just in terms of social influence that kind of go along with it. But it seems to be about an increase in anxiety some, that then goes away. But particularly for girls, that this seems to occur a little bit more than boys. But so they are a particular target. And so in this group I was working with, a good number of them, their victims had been kind of girls in early adolescence. Again, in terms of picking victims that they thought over time they could develop a relationship and get some trust factor with. In terms of outcomes of abuse, this is a short video on neglect, which also talks about
Most people readily understand the damage caused by child abuse. However, the effects of neglect, sometimes overlooked, can be devastating as well. In 1945, Dr. Renee Spitz recorded these scenes in a Latin American orphanage. Though fed and kept clean, these children received little physical, social, or emotional stimulation. Many died. A more recent example of neglect shocked the world as the media reported on the treatment of children in Romanian orphanages under the failed Ceausescu regime.
Well, children are in cribs in long rows. These would be children below the age of 2, 2.5. And I think the thing that's striking to any of us was that they were just lie there. They were the most passive children I had ever seen. I thought that I always learned and taught that children are naturally active. And for once I saw children who weren't naturally active at all. They just lay there. These children were so passive because nothing they did made any difference to them. They weren't fed when they were hungry. They were fed when the bottles came around. They were diapered when it was time for diapers. They could cry, but no one would come, so it didn't matter, and so they didn't cry. They could smile, but no one had time to smile back, so they didn't smile.
Neglect is not always brutal. Sometimes merely failing to meet the child's everyday needs for love and interaction can impair normal development.
I have one son, he's 2 years old, and there's Tommy.
Tommy? Is Rick? Tommy was referred to me because his language skills were delayed, resulting from childhood neglect. What that means is even though he was able to understand everything that people were saying around him, no one had taken the time to sit down and really talk to him and make language, expressive language, meaningful. When you have a child as an infant and a toddler, you need to talk to them, give them the names of things, tell them how things work, and this way the child starts imitating, and this is how language develops.
And the child is neglected. It's not always the case that they don't get fed and they don't get changed and they don't get bathed. It's very often a case of more of a social neglect or interpersonal neglect, where the child does not get enough individual personal attention from the parent, the caregiver. That can give rise to feelings of abandonment, feelings of being alone in the world on the part of this child.
Tommy is 27 months old. When I saw him originally, his language, expressive language age was at the 16 months to 18 month level. He was able to understand everything at his age level, but he was having difficulty expressing himself. A child may have receptive language that is within normal limits for his age, because there's usually things happening in his environment. There's radio or television, particularly television, where a child can be put in front of a television set to keep them calm and entertain them, give them something to do, which your child can listen. There's no way the child interacts. It doesn't require any verbal expression to sit in front of a television set. But the interaction of making language meaningful as a tool for him to manipulate his environment, that was not occurring.
This one is Daniel.
Oh, who's talking? Tommy will be able to reach his chronological age as far as language skills very easily. There's no reason with a little intervention, language stimulation, a little bit of speech and language therapy, he's going to be within normal limits for his age.
The chance to go to the speech therapy and get the help that he needs, maybe if the speech therapy is what he really needs. And the fact that now it's recognized that we have a drug problem, and now we're in a drug program, and we go to parenting classes, we go to drug classes 3 times a week, and I feel that if it hadn't happened, we'd probably still be doing drugs, and Tommy could probably still be somewhere with us having problems, and it would not have been recognized.
The psychologist, which we were talking about the orphan was talking about how she had always taught that children were naturally curious. Who was she talking about when she said that? Which theories? Which theories? Huh? Piaget, yeah, in particular, is probably what she was referring to. Which is true. So it's interesting, in extreme neglect, maybe kind of natural instincts of being curious aren't, that you would, in terms of like sensitive period we're talking about and kind of average expectable environment, that maybe we do have an inclination to be curious, but that it's required to at least get some feedback early on about that, or it kind of goes away, or, not that it goes away entirely, but it suppresses that kind of natural curiosity. But so these are the actual parents, I think, and kind of had substance abuse problems, and this is as we mentioned about. So we mentioned substance abuse in terms of kind of physical abuse and being more impulsive, but also kind of in terms of addicts and the ability to kind of meet basic needs for their kids, especially early in life, because of needing money for drugs or just kind of being high a lot. We're not going to have time for the other video. Let me just, the book has most of these in terms of the outcomes. One thing about physical abuse that, as I said, one of the outcomes, not surprisingly, in the book talks about that is physically abused kids becoming more kind of aggressive themselves, which can occur just by modeling, seeing the way parents do things. But additionally, there's a couple of different studies that suggest they're kind of, what does it take for us to be friends naturally with other kids? Well, it's more based on not just the lack of aggression, but also kind of positive things like showing concern for each other and things like that, that we build friendships based on shared interests and things like that. There's been a couple of different studies that suggest that there's that part of being physically abused can kind of interfere with natural empathic processes and distort the way kids view their social worlds. This one is with looking at, this is with preschoolers. Both the things I'm going to talk about have to do with preschoolers. But looking at, like in a nursery, physically abused and non-abused kids, and what do they do when they see another kid kind of show some distress, like be sad or cry or something like that? You would expect, now for little kids, like helping behaviors they're not like assertive enough yet to like go and actually handle the situation, but even just to kind of turn and look to the kid, is kind of empathy in a way that you're orienting to what the kid who has a concern, and maybe kind of walking closer or trying to get a teacher over, it's more likely that they would get a teacher, and we tell our kids to do that. Oh, if something happens, get a teacher. You know, it's not like they're expected to handle everything. But you can see, you know, the non-abused kids, what most kids typically do. You know, either show concern, if not show some sort of concern, at least look towards them. A little over half did that. Didn't see as much of that among the abused kids, and in fact, not just those kind of positive, basic empathy reactions, but also, in fact, for some of the kids, that sadness and that distress was kind of overwhelming for them, such that they showed negative reactions themselves, like threatening or assaulting the kid, like trying to get the kid. People talk about empathy, like the relationship between how empathic people are and kids are and how much they're helpful is actually not a perfect relationship. More empathy isn't always better, because sometimes we get so aroused that people call it empathic distress. You know, so like I remember playing frisbee, playing ultimate frisbee with some people in school years ago. It was like in this little, called the quad, and there were like big trees along both sides. And you know, I remember this buddy of mine, like, he was like a little short, stocky guy, really muscular, a little bowling ball kind of guy. And so anyway, somebody throws a frisbee, and we all see it's going to happen. He's running as fast as he can, and the frisbee's going right towards this tree. And I remember, you know, like, he was a few steps away, and like, I think I said something, a bunch of us said something, but I had to look away at the moment that happened, because you know what was going to happen. And actually, he actually, like, bounced off the thing and fell back the tree, and he was actually fine. He was, like, stunned for a couple of minutes, but there wasn't any cuts or anything like that. I don't think any long-term damage. But, like, in that moment, you know, kind of my arousal, I remember looking away, and it was because, you know, I was fearing the worst, and that arousal was too much, and it made me turn away. And then, of course, I quickly went and saw if he was okay. But for at least that split second, the distress was too much, and my body had to look away to regulate what was going to happen. But so you see kids, physically abused kids, you know, their arousal system is such that they get worked up more. And in fact, some of the kids who might need the help, they kind of show negative reactions to. The other thing I want to talk about is a guy up at Wisconsin has done some interesting studies dealing with preschoolers who have been physically abused and how they perceive their social world. And he's done this with facial expressions, like can they recognize faces. It basically finds that they tend to perceive other people as angry and mean in the world. And one thing that he's done that's pretty neat, that's kind of interesting, is he's taken like a happy face and an angry face, or a scared face and an angry face, and morphed them, like with computer technology. Like these are photographs, but he's morphed them. Did I talk about this in your? I don't think so. Okay. So if you think of like the scared face and the angry face, so he's morphed it so there's like 10 pictures that get from the extreme anger, the extreme scared, the extreme angry face. You know, it gets like in the middle, apparently, presumably it's about half and half scared and angry looking face, and it kind of moves along there. Well, he's found that this is really interesting, that like abused kids, physically abused kids, are actually more accurate in a sense of recognizing these faces, but they have a slight bias towards seeing anger. So that, like non-abused kids, and these are preschool kids again, like they don't call it an angry face until it's like 3 pictures away from the end, where the anger is. So like, they actually seem to have a bias away from seeing a face as angry. And if you think about it, we kind of, you know, like we talked about a week or so ago, about we kind of early in life do have rose-colored glasses. We have a lot of positives for parents, and we expect people to be on our side and happy and like be on our side. So maybe we do have a bias that we develop away from thinking of people as angry or threatening. But anyway, the abused kids were slightly in the other direction. They were like 4 away from scared before they started calling it angry. So they had a bias, you know, it still wasn't quite at the midpoint, and they were already calling it angry, but in a sense they were closer to the midpoint, so they were more accurate in a way. But so there's ways in which being abused, and people think, we talked about, or at least I talked about the amygdala a little bit in terms of that being a center for fear. It's also a center that's linked to memory a lot, and that's probably part of what's going on with physically abused kids, is that there's kind of hypersensitivity of the amygdala such that it perceives a threat more quickly, and kids learn to interpret things as threatening so that they can avoid, if you're sitting at home, if you're a kid in an abusive home, well, you're going to want to know when Dad starts to get angry, or Mom starts to get angry, because that way you can go to your room or do whatever, get out of the way, before it becomes abusive situations where you get hurt. And that might be adaptive for them to do that, and their brains to modify it the way they perceive things that way. But then if you think about it in terms of going to school, that might not be as adaptive to walk into school with this kind of bias towards seeing other kids as angry more often than they really are. Because how do we respond when kids are angry? And maybe we think they're angry at us, or maybe we think they're hostile towards us. Well, we might just avoid them, but at the same time we also might react in a more defensive or kind of reactive way to them that ends up leading us to get into fights with them. So that's one of the things that we think is what's going on with physically abused kids, why they become more aggressive with kids in elementary school.